Hello everyone and welcome to the next entry of the diary. It's a first today with the diary entries. Andy had two very short diary entries, so I decided to combine them into one video. Today we'll be looking at Monday, December 27th and Wednesday, December 29th, 1976. Before we do that though, we have some housekeeping before we jump into the video. The first one is, this is a PFA, that's a plea for assistance regarding my uncle's murder in 2011. His name was Charles Pancheri and he lived in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Sometime during the night or early morning of October 4th, 2011, a person or persons broke into his home and killed him, leaving him dead on the floor from stab wounds. My uncle was in his 70s and he had no known enemies and kept to himself. To date, there are no leads and the case has gone cold. If you have any information, no matter how trivial you might think it is, please call Union County Crime Stoppers at 908-654-TIPS. That's 908-654-TIPS. Or you can go to their website at www.uctip.org. That's www.uc, so Union County, tip.org. And I thank you very much for your cooperation and assistance. Next thing is, if you'd like to read along with the diary at home, you can go right here to this link, or you can just type it in the Google bar, Andy Warhol virtual diary. Once you get to this main page, you want to go right here where it says full text and just look for the date that we're looking at today, and that would be Monday the 27th and Wednesday the 29th, 1976. So let's jump into this. On Monday, December 27th, Andy states he received the invite for President Carter's inauguration, and the letter was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Andy Warhol, and Andy was very amused by that. Carter's inauguration would take place on January 20th, 1977, at the Capitol Building in Washington, D.C. Jimmy Carter would be sworn in as the 39th president. The inauguration featured a walk down Pennsylvania Avenue in 28-degree Fahrenheit weather. The inauguration also featured music by Willie Nelson, Aretha Franklin, and Leonard Bernstein, among others. Also taking part in the inaugural parade was Colonel Sanders of Kentucky Fried Chicken. A little bit about Colonel Sanders. He was born as... before we get to that, here's just a list of all the music that was featured in Carter's inaugurational celebration. As for Colonel Sanders, he was born Harland David Sanders in the state of Indiana. He learned to cook for his siblings after his father's death in 1895, so the colonel was only about 5 years old. His mother had to go work in a canning factory, and by the age of 7, Colonel Sanders was improving his cooking skills with bread and vegetables. He dropped out of school at the age of 12, as he stated that algebra was too difficult for him and he was struggling. He worked on and off as a farmhand and a carriage painter. He took a job with his uncle as a conductor for a streetcar company in New Albany, Indiana. He falsified his date of birth and enlisted in the Army in 1906. This is where he picked up his colonel moniker. Although he wasn't actually a colonel, he had a brief time in the Army as a private. Sanders received an honorary Kentucky colonel title from the state governor in 1935 for his work with Shell Oil. Sanders was given a franchise rent-free in return for paying the company a percentage of sales. Now, in an interesting story, he also got into a shootout with a competitor named Matt Stewart. Matt covered up a sign that was directing traffic to Sanders' gas station. And this competitor, Matt Stewart, killed a Shell employee and he was sentenced to murder. And if you'd like to read the entire story, you can go right here to this link. The time Colonel Sanders shot another person. In 1939, the colonel started working on a chicken recipe, which he called his secret recipe, which cooked chicken in a pressure fryer versus traditional pan frying. Now you can see right here the description of pressure frying, and it's actually the way that most chicken is prepared these days in commercial restaurants. eventually marketing his pressure fried chicken and spices recipe to restaurants, and then opening a franchise of restaurants, which was sold to a partnership of Kentucky businessmen for $2 million back then, and that would be about $20 million today. Sanders was 73 years old at this point. Sanders used to visit the KFC restaurants, and he was disappointed by the food, especially the gravy recipe, which had been simplified to cut costs. For the last 20 years of his life, he would dress the part of Colonel Sanders. He wore a black frock coat, but eventually switched to a white suit and a black ribbon bow tie, and he referred to himself on a regular basis as the Colonel. Harland died in 1980 at the age of 90 from pneumonia. Now back to the Jimmy Carter inauguration. Traditionally, the president-elect, so that would be whoever's elected president, right? They would be driven by limousine after taking the oath, but Jimmy and Rosalynn broke the tradition by getting out of the limo and walking the 1.5 miles down the avenue to the White House. President Carter was also the first president to be sworn in using his nickname of Jimmy rather than his legal name of James. And speaking of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., I have a quick story for you really fast. I don't know if it was in the 70s or the early 80s, my parents decided to take us for a vacation to Washington, D.C. And, we were doing the whole tour thing. I remember it was summertime, so it was, not cold outside. We're just, walking around in regular clothes, no coats or anything. But my mom would always be the one to hold on to everything that we bought. So, we would buy all these souvenirs and things, and she would put them in, a big shopping bag, and she would carry it over her shoulder. Well, this one day, we were touring the Capitol building, and she was in front. Now, I could see this plain as day. She was in front of me going down the steps. And I have a little diagram here. So she was going down the steps, right here. So she was, right in the spot right here. And all of a sudden, I see, in slow motion, she's like, ah! And, her arm goes out, her left arm goes out in front of her, and she's holding the bag with her right arm, so she only has one arm to, brace her. And she, fell down the stairs onto the sidewalk, and, everything that we bought just, went out into the sidewalk, all down the, down into the, whatever this is. I don't know if this is actual street or what. But what I remember most of all is that nobody blinked an eye. Everybody just kept on walking right past her, laying there on the sidewalk. And there was actually a person who was coming up to my mom as my mom was falling. And the guy, stepped right over my mom's legs to, just keep walking on his way. Didn't ask how she was doing, nothing. So I'll always remember that. My mom falling down the steps of the Capitol building. And that's it for Monday the 27th. That's all Andy had. He just remarked a little bit about the address on the Carter inauguration invite. As for the 29th, we have Andy receiving the Iranian ambassador to England at the New York City office. The ambassador was accompanied by the Prime Minister, Fereydoon Hoveyda. Parviz Camran Radji was the son of an orthopedic surgeon. He was born in Tehran in 1936. He came to America and studied economics at Trinity Hall, Cambridge, after attending high school in America. Radji worked for a few years as a private secretary to the ambassador. He then became Hoveyda's special advisor. In 1976, Radji became the ambassador to London and held this position until 1979, just before the Islamic Revolution in Iran. After the revolution began, Radji was informed that he was no longer the ambassador, and he permanently relocated to the UK, which is probably a smart thing. Anyway, these two individuals came by the Warhol office to look at the portrait Andy did of the Empress. That would be Queen Farah Diba Pahlavi. Earlier in the year, before Andy started recording this diary, he flew to Tehran and took some Polaroids of the Queen to be used for these silkscreens. This trip was heavily criticized in the USA, with papers like the Village Voice, who ran a front-page photo of Andy in front of the Queen's portrait and the headline was "The Beautiful Butcher." And if you'd like to read about that story, you can read it right here. Has everything in there. And here's a snippet from the actual the Voice article. And here's the actual Village Voice full article right here. You can read about that right there. Back in the diary, Andy reported that the ambassadors liked the painting of the Queen, so it was going to be shipped out. In the final paragraph of this entry, Andy talks about Vincent Fremont, who's this guy right here. We talked about him a few times before. He was the vice president of Andy Warhol Enterprises and was one of the founding directors of the Warhol Foundation after Andy's passing. Andy tells the diary that Vincent had to go out to the Montauk property for the hearings and notes that it has to do with the Wetlands Commission. Now, we've taken a tour of the Montauk property in a prior video. It's located in Montauk, Long Island. It's a famous 5.7 acre oceanfront compound, and Andy frequently rented it out to friends who wanted to get some peace away from the city. Vincent probably had to attend some mandatory meeting for wetland conservation since they own the property there. And if you want to go onto this website, the Concerned Citizens of Montauk, and see what they do and what they represent and what they support. And don't forget to stop by the gift shop on your way out. And that's going to do it for the diary entries for these 2 days. So now to on these dates in history. On Monday, December 27, 1976, we just talked about Carter's inauguration, but at this time, Gerald Ford was still the president, having taken over for Nixon. In addition to being overshadowed by Nixon's Watergate scandal, Ford was the president during the worst economy in 4 decades since the Great Depression. He was also dealing with the remnants of issues from the Vietnam War that ended in 1975. Ford agreed to look into the possibility of granting a general amnesty to Vietnam War draft resistors and deserters. He was looking into this at the behest of the widow of Senator Philip Hart of Michigan, who died in 1976 from cancer. This widow was named Jane Briggs Hart, and she was a staunch anti-war activist. When a reporter asked President Ford if he were seriously going to grant the amnesty, Ford replied and said that at her, Jane Hart's request, he would look into it. He promised that he would look into it, not that he promised he was going to grant an amnesty. Ford eventually granted a conditional amnesty where draft evaders and deserters had to perform up to 24 months of public service or alternative work to serve the community. They also had to reaffirm their allegiance to the USA. When Carter was elected and in office, he fulfilled a campaign promise by granting a full, unconditional pardon to Vietnam-era draft evaders who had violated the draft, although it did not apply to military deserters. On Wednesday, December 29, 1976, a study was released and published in the New York Times regarding solar heating. The article said that solar heating could compete with electric in newly built, well-insulated one-family homes in at least 13 cities. In the future, it may be able to compete with oil and natural gas, but it would only be able to do so if the cost of installation could be cut by at least half. And just as a note, in 1976, the yearly average income for an individual was around $8,500, and minimum wage was about $2.10. And if you'd like to read the entire article, this is a free article by the Times if you'd like to learn more about solar heat back in 1976. And that's going to do it for the entire 2 days from the diary entry. I hope you found this informative and interesting, and I enjoyed doing these for you guys. And I'll see you in the next one. MUBBO.